Poetry for the Community, tonight on Basic Black. Poetry has become the new voice of a generation in the past decade. With rhymes that recall the urgency and passion of the Black arts movement of the 1960s, these poets are connecting culture and art through wordsmithing as a powerful means of forming identity and a sense of belonging to culture and to community. Good evening. I'm Robin Chandler, and I'm delighted to welcome two poets from the Boston community, Ayisha Knight and Curtis King. We're also pleased to be joined by Jody Steiner, who will be interpreting for Ayisha. I'd like to start off by asking you when you realized that language and words and poetry could move people.
I'd say around the age of like 4, 5, 6, watching Sesame Street.
When you were very young.
Yeah, pretty much. And, seeing how much, it impacted me and my peers and everything. And, just wanting to entertain in the same way. So then around 8, finally getting my first poetry recital, it encouraged me to just continue with it.
So you were doing poetry at 8, literally, quite performing, wonderful.
Yeah.
Ayisha, what about you?
I think similarly, I was quite young. I was exposed to a lot of different cultures, a lot of different arts, photography, sculpture, writing, and saw how fascinating and how powerful the different mediums were. I was a very shy person. I didn't start doing poetry till I was in college.
Right. Now, both of you, you might say, are spoken word poets, and I'd like you to talk a little bit about the distinction or the difference between spoken word poetry and mainstream or regular poetry.
Spoken word, they tend to describe that as what? Sort of like the continuation of like the oral tradition of our ancestors.
Okay.
And the mainstream poetry is, or the literary poetry is what they look upon as the poetry that falls on, how it falls on the page and how it looks in writing and stays within the academic laws of like syntax and semantics. But I could put both of those definitions for spoken word and poetry, so I don't really find a distinction between them. I like to see them as
so
both
the
of the same.
boundary's more fluid.
Yeah.
It's not so clear sometimes. How about you, Ayisha?
Well, in my case, it's a little bit different because I actually do write poetry, but my medium is American Sign Language, and I perform using American Sign Language, and since sign language is 3D, telling a story through my hands and my face and my body. Of course, I rely and respect the Black traditions and cultures, and it's fascinating to look at poets from the past and the written poets. But I feel that both genres are very important because the goal is to communicate. And you can teach a lot about our history through both mediums.
Right. You bring up an interesting point when you talk about the unique aspects of deaf culture and performance. And so I'd like to ask you both, first you, Curtis, about the impact of culture on the production of one's poetry. So in other words, your Caribbean culture may somehow be reflected in your work. Is it the musical cadence of the culture, of the language? In what way is your culture reflected in your work?
Definitely the musical cadence with it, and the dialect of my language. I'm from Barbados, and calypso is like the main song over there. So I tend to use that a lot in terms of the way I structure my flow of speech, and also not just the rhythm but the melody, because my poetry also falls into song as well too. So I use a lot of my Caribbean background to enhance my poetry, reggae as well, but you know, steel pan, the music as well too,
Yes.
influences
And
me a
we'll
lot.
hear
The
this-
instruments.
We'll hear this
Yeah.
later in your performance, right? Ayisha, for you, how does deaf culture and poetry come together?
There's just a very natural, synergistic blending. As Curtis was talking about his culture, that happens the same with American Sign Language. The use of handshapes, the use of rhythm and rhyme, the use of space, how beautiful the motions are. And within the language, we can incorporate my Jewish heritage, my lesbian heritage, my black heritage. All parts of me come through my words, and that all influences who I am, and that comes out in my poetry. So all parts of me come through with my signs.
So
I
there's-
also feel very, very lucky and to have an opportunity to show my work. And I'm very excited to see so many different people's work, and we learn from each other.
A lot of cross-fertilization. For both of you, I'd like you to think about what is your approach to composing? A lot of people have very different approaches to composing poetry. They keep notebooks. What is your inspiration? What sets the fire or ignites a poem on a particular subject?
It could be the environment. It could be, it could be like a bird on a pole. It could be like, you know, like a bad relationship, and just like pull the emotion out of you. Sometimes my work stems from the emotion, but also, you know, just comes from the spirit, from Jah, where, you know, it just
Who's Jah?
moves you. You know, that's you. That's my God. You know.
Okay.
You know, we call mommy, mother, this, that, that.
Right.
Right. That's just how I call my God, and through Jah, I just, you know, I'm moved to make this music. And also the emotions also can move it, or there's planning, but I just let the spirit move me.
So it's a very spiritual process for you. How about you, Ayisha? Where do your ideas come from?
It's fascinating to listen to you. It's funny because I was talking with my interpreter this morning too about where my inspiration comes. My dreams are quite vivid, and I see clearly in American Sign Language. So when I wake up, I have to jot down the images and the ideas. And sometimes a word might generate a picture for me, and it kind of hits me in the face, and I start creating my poems immediately. So it could be, you know, it could be a love story, it could be feeling related, it could be I'm just passionate. I'm a passionate liver, and everything I do kind of influences my creativity. So I also try to, when I see other deaf poetry, I'm just fascinated, and I'm not really borrowing from other poets, but
Right.
I'm fascinated, their use of language and their use of handshapes and their use of language and what I can do to incorporate my own personal experience into a genre like poetry.
You mentioned your relationship with your interpreter. What are the challenges of working with an interpreter for your poetry performances?
It is a challenge. Sometimes it is a challenge. But it's also quite an amazing relationship.
Exciting, yeah.
I mean, it requires a tremendous amount of trust.
Right.
We do have to work quite closely together. We talk together about specific word choices. If I'm in front of an audience that doesn't sign, we will figure out the appropriate language and timing and rhythm. If it's a deaf audience, it doesn't matter. Then I just
Right.
do my thing.
Yeah.
And it's fine. But I enjoy working with interpreters, and so far I've been very, very lucky. It's an important part of my life.
Sounds very stimulating.
Yes, it is.
Now I want to move now and talk a little bit about your audiences and your community. I know that both of you have very deep commitments to a number of issues that are important to you. How do you translate those commitments into your work and into the kind of work you actually do in communities, whether schools, theaters, etc.? Curtis?
Like Ayisha was saying, it depends on the audience I'm working with, because writing the work initially is for my healing, but in order to spread it, I have to, want to be able to walk under the same umbrella with my audience. Right. And so I try to make them feel as much as home as I can with what I'm doing. So it depends on what community I'm stepping into. I can get pretty street with them, but I try to stay away from getting too harsh, because as much as I want to bring across my message and find that to be the most important, the way in which I bring it about must be just as much in the balancing act of how I bring it out.
Right.
Yeah.
Right. Absolutely. Ayisha, I know that you work with schools and theater groups and the Department of Mental Health. You work with a lot of different kinds of people. And what does your poetry mean to you when you're able to work in those environments with all of these people?
It's actually quite a gift. Having this poetry feels like a great responsibility. I feel we have an opportunity to influence each other, for me to give and to learn from the people I'm working with, an opportunity for growth and change, and all of that within my communities. I feel, well, when I first started making poetry, same as Curtis said, I was doing it for my own healing process, for myself. Yeah. I wanted to get things out of me. I wanted to just leave it and put it aside. And as I grew and changed, I realized how important poetry could be. And as I was showing my work, I realized I wasn't alone in the things that I was feeling, and I was able to connect with many, many different people, and this was quite important. I've worked with various communities, and as I take in their experiences and they become my own, that helps me open up to a broader sense of the world, and that we keep sharing with each other. It's quite powerful and quite moving. Right now, I tend to work with marginalized communities, people who don't know their own importance, and people who need to be paid attention to and given the tools to express themselves, and to give them permission even that they can express themselves. And I see how that changes, and I see their own empowerment grow, their self-esteem grow, and when they get recognized through their poetry, it influences their worth in the world. So it helps people express themselves, become more creative, and I believe truly that one can change the world that way. And that's the reality for